Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon, watching the strange ships approach through the darkness of space. The vessels looked like they were made of crystal and light, moving in perfect formation toward his exploration ship. He had never seen anything like them in his 15 years of deep space missions. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Amy Foster from her communications station. Her voice carried excitement mixed with nervousness. This was humanity's first contact with an alien species, and everyone on the bridge knew they were making history. "Put it through," Morrison ordered, straightening his uniform. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at beings that seemed to glow with their own inner light. The aliens had tall, elegant forms that appeared to be made of living crystal, with faces that were both beautiful and completely inhuman. "Greetings, humans of Earth," the lead alien said, its voice melodic and warm. "I am High Trader Zenth of the Zelfani Collective. We have traveled far to meet your remarkable species." Commander Lisa Rodriguez stepped closer to Morrison's chair. Something about the alien's perfect presentation bothered her, though she couldn't put her finger on what. They seemed too polished, too prepared for this meeting. "Welcome to human space," Morrison replied carefully. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Horizon. How did you learn our language?" Zenth's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. "We have been observing your species from a respectful distance for some time. Your people show such promise, such unique abilities. We believe we can offer each other great benefits through partnership." The alien explained that the Zelfani were traders and explorers who had built relationships with dozens of species across the galaxy. They offered advanced technology, medical knowledge, and scientific discoveries in exchange for what they called collaborative labor agreements. "Your species possesses remarkable problem-solving abilities," Zenth continued. "Your minds work in ways that complement our own perfectly. We operate deep space mining facilities and research stations that would benefit greatly from human insight and creativity." Rodriguez frowned. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Voluntary service contracts," another Zelfani replied, stepping forward. This one introduced itself as Trade Coordinator Velth. "Humans who choose to work with us would receive generous compensation, advanced training, and the opportunity to see wonders beyond your current imagination. Think of it as an exchange program that benefits both our peoples." The offer seemed almost too good to be true. The Zelfani promised to share technology that could solve Earth's energy problems, cure diseases, and open doorways to the stars. In return, they wanted human workers for their Outer Rim operations. The contracts would last 5 Earth years, with full compensation and safe return guaranteed. Morrison felt the weight of the decision. Humanity had been searching for signs of intelligent life for generations, and now they were being offered partnership with an advanced civilization. But Rodriguez's concerned expression reminded him to be cautious. "We'll need to discuss this with Earth Command," Morrison said. "This is a decision that affects all of humanity." "Of course," Zenth replied smoothly. "We understand the magnitude of such a partnership. Take all the time you need. We will remain in this system while you consult with your leaders." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence. First contact had gone better than anyone had dared hope. The aliens seemed friendly, offering incredible opportunities for advancement and cooperation. But Rodriguez pulled Morrison aside as soon as they were alone in his ready room. "Something feels wrong about this, Jake. They're too smooth, too practiced. It's like they've had this conversation before many times." Morrison nodded slowly. "I noticed that too. But what if we're just being paranoid? This could be the greatest opportunity in human history." "Or the greatest trap," Rodriguez replied quietly, back on Earth. Admiral Henry Carter reviewed the first contact reports with a mixture of excitement and concern. The Joint Chiefs were divided. Some saw unlimited potential in partnership with an advanced alien civilization. Others worried about the risks of sending humans into unknown space with beings they had just met. Dr. Alex Thompson, head of the Xenological Studies Division, spent days analyzing every word of the Zelfani communication. Their language patterns, body language, and presentation all suggested a highly sophisticated culture. But something nagged at him about their perfect knowledge of human psychology and desires. They knew exactly what to offer us, Thompson told Carter during their private meeting. Energy solutions, medical advances, exploration opportunities. It's like they studied our greatest needs and designed their proposal specifically to appeal to them. Carter leaned back in his chair. Isn't that what good diplomats do? Learn about the people they're negotiating with? Maybe, Thompson replied. But it could also be what predators do when they're selecting prey. Despite the concerns, the potential benefits were too significant to ignore. Earth was facing energy crises, overpopulation, and environmental challenges that alien technology could help solve. After weeks of debate, Carter authorized a limited trial program. The first group of volunteers was carefully selected. Engineer Danny Walsh, a brilliant problem solver with experience in extreme environments. Xenobiologist Karen Bell, eager to study alien life forms. Pilot Steve Johnson, who had dreamed of exploring beyond the solar system since childhood. Communications specialist Janet Miller, fascinated by alien languages and cultures. 12 humans in total agreed to the 5-year contracts, each one excited about the adventure ahead. They underwent months of preparation, learning what little was known about Zelthani culture and technology. The aliens provided basic language lessons and cultural orientation materials. Commander Rodriguez attended the departure ceremony, watching as the volunteers boarded the sleek Zelthani transport vessel. She shook hands with each of them, wishing them luck while fighting down her lingering unease. Take care of yourselves out there, she told Danny Walsh as he prepared to board. Stay alert, stay together, and remember that you represent all of humanity. Danny grinned confidently. Don't worry, Commander. We'll make Earth proud. This is going to be the adventure of a lifetime. The Zelthani ship departed smoothly, its crystal hull glowing brighter as it accelerated toward the edge of the solar system. Within hours, it had jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying the first human ambassadors to the stars. Morrison and Rodriguez watched from the horizon's bridge as the alien ship disappeared into the vast darkness of space. The captain felt a mixture of pride and worry as he thought about the brave volunteers now traveling to unknown worlds. I hope we made the right choice, he said quietly. Rodriguez stared at the empty space where the ship had been. So do I, Jake. So do I. Back on Earth, preparations began for expanded cooperation with the Zelthani. Scientists worked to understand the sample technologies the aliens had provided. Diplomats prepared for formal trade negotiations. Military leaders quietly developed security protocols for future alien contact, but in the depths of space, far from Earth's monitoring systems, the human volunteers were about to discover that everything they believed about their new alien partners was a carefully constructed lie. The truth waiting for them in the outer rim would change not just their own fate, but the destiny of humanity itself. The Zelthani had indeed studied dozens of species before making contact. They knew exactly what to say, exactly what to offer, and exactly how to make their proposals irresistible. They had practiced this deception for thousands of years, perfecting it with each new civilization they encountered, and now, for the first time, they were about to learn what happened when they tried to deceive a species that refused to stay deceived. 3 months after the volunteers left Earth, Dr. Alex Thompson was working late in his laboratory when the encrypted signal arrived. The message was weak, fragmented, and barely readable through layers of interference. But what he could decode made his blood run cold. The transmission had originated from the Outer Rim territories, sent on a frequency that matched the emergency beacon carried by engineer Danny Walsh. Thompson's hands shook as he cleaned up the signal, filtering out cosmic background noise and alien interference patterns. Base ... This is Danny Walsh ... emergency. Transmission ... lied about everything ... We are not partners ... We are property. The entire galaxy fears them. Now we know why. The signal cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Thompson played it 17 times, hoping he had misunderstood something. But the message was clear, and it confirmed his worst fears about the Zelfanae partnership. Thompson immediately contacted Admiral Carter, waking him in the middle of the night. Carter arrived at the laboratory within an hour, still in his sleeping clothes but fully alert. "Play it again," Carter ordered after hearing the message for the first time. Thompson activated the recording. Carter's expression grew darker with each word. When the message ended, both men sat in heavy silence. "How certain are we that this is genuine?" Carter asked finally. "Voice pattern analysis confirms it's Danny Walsh," Thompson replied. "The transmission signature matches our emergency beacon technology, and the background radiation suggests it came from the outer rim region where the Zelfani said they were taking our people." Carter stood up and began pacing. "If this is true, we just sent 12 of our best people into slavery. And worse, we've exposed Earth to whatever these aliens really are." Thompson pulled up holographic displays showing his analysis of Zelfani behavior patterns. "I've been studying their first contact protocol since they left. Everything about their approach was too perfect, too calculated. They knew exactly what humanity wanted to hear." "What do you recommend?" Carter asked. "We need to verify this intelligence," Thompson said. "But we have to assume the worst-case scenario. If the Zelfani are running some kind of galactic slave operation, then Earth is probably next on their list." Carter activated his secure communicator. "Get me Captain Morrison aboard the Horizon. Emergency priority." Captain Jake Morrison received the orders while patrolling the outer edge of human space. His mission was classified at the highest levels, used captured Zelfani technology to infiltrate their operations and confirm the intelligence from Danny Walsh's transmission. Commander Lisa Rodriguez studied the modified sensor arrays that would allow them to appear as a Zelfani inspection vessel. The disguise was crude but might hold up under casual observation. "This is insane, Jake," she said as they prepared for the reconnaissance mission. "We're flying into completely unknown territory with technology we barely understand." Morrison: "Check their weapon systems one final time. If our people are in trouble out there, we have to try to help them. And if Earth is being threatened, we need to know what we're facing." The Horizon jumped to faster-than-light travel, following navigation data recovered from Zelfani computer systems. The journey took 4 days, during which the crew prepared for what they might find. Lieutenant Amy Foster worked around the clock to decode more Zelfani communications, hoping to locate the facility where human volunteers were being held. What she discovered in the alien transmissions was worse than anyone had imagined. "Captain, you need to see this," Foster called Morrison to her station. The communication log showed routine reports about something called Processing Station Gamma 7. The reports mentioned new acquisition efficiency and subject psychological conditioning protocols. "They're not talking about mining operations," Morrison realized as he read the decoded messages. "They're talking about people. Processing. People." Rodriguez felt sick as she read over Morrison's shoulder. The volunteers weren't taken to work sites. They were taken to some kind of conditioning facility. The Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the coordinates specified in the Zelfani communications. What they found was a massive space station orbiting a dead planet, with dozens of ships coming and going in organized patterns. "Multiple species represented," Foster reported as she analyzed the vessel signatures. "I'm seeing ship designs from at least 20 different civilizations." Morrison ordered silent running as they approached the station. The Zelfani technology disguising. Their ships seemed to be working. No one challenged their approach or demanded identification, but as they got closer, the crew could see the true nature of the facility through enhanced sensors. The station was divided into sections, each one holding different species in what could only be described as prison conditions. "Dear God," Rodriguez whispered as she watched the sensor displays. "How many people are in there?" Foster ran the calculations. "Thousands. Maybe tens of thousands. All different species, all kept in separate containment areas." Morrison made the decision to dock with the station, maintaining their disguise as Zelfani inspectors. The automated systems accepted their false credentials, allowing them to enter the facility. What they found inside would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. The station was a factory for processing intelligent beings, newly captured. Species were brought to orientation chambers where they were told lies about voluntary service contracts. Those who resisted were subjected to psychological conditioning. Those who submitted were sent to work details that gradually broke their will to resist. Morrison and Rodriguez moved through the facility, their hidden cameras recording everything. They saw humans from their volunteer group working alongside beings from dozens of other worlds. All of them wore the same expression of defeated acceptance, but they also saw something else that gave them hope. In hidden corners and quiet moments, the prisoners were communicating with each other. Despite coming from completely different worlds and cultures, they were finding ways to share information and support each other. Rodriguez managed to make brief contact with Karen Bell, the xenobiologist from their volunteer group. Bell had lost weight and looked exhausted, but her eyes still held intelligence and determination. "They're not invincible," Bell whispered during their brief meeting in a maintenance corridor. "The other species here have been studying them for years. We're learning their weaknesses." "How many species are being held here?" Rodriguez asked quietly. 43 that we've identified," Bell replied. "Some have been prisoners for generations, but they've never stopped planning, never stopped hoping for a chance to fight back." Bell passed Rodriguez a small data chip hidden in her palm. "Everything we've learned is on there. Zelthani psychology, their technology, their weaknesses. Get it back to Earth." The reunion was cut short when Zelthani guards began a routine patrol of the area. Morrison and Rodriguez had to retreat to their ship, carrying with them the terrible knowledge of what humanity was truly facing. As the Horizon prepared to leave the station, they intercepted communications that revealed the full scope of the Zelthani operation. The aliens controlled over 300 star systems, each one dedicated to processing and controlling intelligent species. Earth was designated as Cultivation Zone 7 Alpha in their files. The planet was scheduled for what the Zelthani called full harvest. Within the next solar cycle, Foster decoded more transmissions during their journey. Back to Earth, the messages revealed that the Zelthani had been operating this system for thousands of years, systematically enslaving entire civilizations under the pretense of trade partnerships. "They're farmers," Morrison said as he reviewed the intelligence they had gathered. "They let civilizations develop just enough to become useful, then they harvest them like crops." But there was something else in the data that none of them had expected. The psychological profiles compiled by the imprisoned species contained detailed analyses of Zelthani behavior patterns. The aliens had one critical weakness. They had never encountered a species that grew more dangerous. When threatened instead of more compliant, Rodriguez studied Bell's data chip during the return journey. The information showed that every species the Zelthani had previously enslaved had eventually submitted when faced with overwhelming force. The aliens' entire system was built on the assumption that all intelligent life would choose survival over resistance. They've never met humans before, Rodriguez realized. They don't understand what happens when you threaten something we care about. When the Horizon arrived back at Earth, Morrison immediately reported to Admiral Carter and Dr. Thompson. The intelligence they brought back painted a picture of the greatest threat humanity had ever faced, but it also revealed something the Zelthani had not anticipated. For the first time in their long history of conquest, they had enslaved a species whose friends would come looking for them. And those friends were already beginning to understand that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. The volunteers were not just prisoners. They were humanity's first intelligence assets behind enemy lines, gathering information and building alliances that would soon turn the Zelthani's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. Dr. Alex Thompson worked for 18 hours straight analyzing the data chip that Karen Bell had given to Commander Rodriguez. The information contained on that tiny device was worth more than all the gold on Earth. It was a complete guide to the Zelthani Empire, written by dozens of enslaved species over hundreds of years. The intelligence showed that the Zelthani had conquered civilizations across the galaxy using the same pattern every time. First contact, followed by trade offers, then gradual enslavement, and finally complete subjugation. No species had ever broken the cycle, but as Thompson studied the psychological profiles, he noticed something that made his hands shake with excitement. Every previous species had responded to Zelthani aggression by trying to negotiate, hide, or submit. None had ever responded with organized, calculated violence. "They've never fought a war," Thompson realized, calling Admiral Carter at 3 in the morning. In thousands of years of conquest, they've never faced a species that chose to fight back instead of surrender. Carter arrived at Thompson's laboratory within the hour, bringing with him General Paul Stevens, the newly appointed head of Terran Defense Command. Stevens was a combat veteran who had earned his reputation fighting pirates in the outer colonies. "Show me what you found," Stevens said. Studying the alien data with the eye of a professional soldier, Thompson displayed holographic charts, showing Zelthani military capabilities. Their technology was advanced, but their tactics were designed for suppression, not warfare. They had weapons for controlling populations and breaking resistance, but nothing designed for fighting an enemy that refused to be controlled. "They're used to dealing with civilized species," Stevens observed. "Beings who value preservation of life above all else. They've never encountered humans." General Stevens authorized what became known as the Revelation Protocol. Instead of trying to hide the truth about the Zelthani threat, Earth would use that knowledge as a weapon. Every human would learn what they were facing, and every human would help prepare for the fight. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. Humanity's first contact with aliens had been a deception. 12 of their best people were prisoners in an alien slave camp. Earth itself was scheduled for conquest within the year, but instead of causing panic, the revelation had the opposite effect. Humans began volunteering for military service in record numbers. Scientists abandoned their peaceful research to develop weapons. Engineers started designing ships for war instead of exploration. Engineer Susan Clark led the most important project in human history. Working with the Zelthani technology samples that had been left behind, she began reverse engineering alien systems. But Clark didn't just copy what she found. She improved it. The Zelthani had designed their technology for control and efficiency. Clark redesigned it for destruction and chaos. Their peaceful mining lasers became weapons capable of cutting through alien hulls. Their communication systems became tools for disrupting enemy coordination. "The aliens think like bureaucrats," Clark explained to her team of volunteer engineers. "Everything they build is designed to maintain order and control. We're going to show them what happens when humans decide to create disorder." Captain Morrison took the modified ship UES Defiance on a series of reconnaissance missions to Zelthani-controlled systems. What he found confirmed their worst fears and best hopes at the same time. The Zelthani Empire was vast and well-organized, with hundreds of slave worlds feeding resources to their core systems. But it was also brittle, dependent on the assumption that conquered species would remain passive. Commander Rodriguez established contact with resistance groups throughout the galaxy. Using the intelligence gathered by Karen Bell and the other human prisoners, she began building a network of communication between enslaved species. The response was immediate and electric. Species that had been slaves for generations suddenly had hope again. The humans were not just another conquered race. They were actively fighting back, and they had a plan. Rodriguez's most important contact was with a being called Elder Vrak, representing the Korathi people who had been enslaved for over 200 years. The Korathi had maintained secret resistance cells throughout their captivity, but they had never had the means to fight effectively. "Your species is different," Vrak communicated through hidden channels. "The Zelthani are afraid of you. We can see it in how they talk about humans. They have never been afraid before." The intelligence network revealed crucial information about Zelthani psychology. The aliens had built their empire on fear and the certainty that resistance was futile, but they had never faced a species that viewed death as preferable to slavery. Dr. Thompson's analysis of intercepted Zelfani communications showed increasing concern among their leadership. High Command was receiving reports about human behavioral anomalies that didn't match their predictions for a newly contacted species. The Zelfani had expected humans to either submit immediately upon learning the truth or collapse into despair and chaos. Instead, humanity had responded with organized, systematic preparation for war. General Stevens coordinated the largest military buildup in human history. But the real power wasn't in the weapons or ships being constructed. It was in the mindset of the people building them. Factory workers stayed on the job for 16-hour shifts, building components for weapons they had never seen before. Students abandoned their classes to learn military tactics and alien technology. Retired soldiers came out of retirement to train new recruits. The entire planet was mobilizing for a war that most people didn't fully understand, fighting an enemy they had never seen to save people they had never met. And they were doing it because it was the right thing to do. Major Patricia Green, working in military intelligence, intercepted communications that showed the Zelfani were accelerating their timeline for Earth's conquest. The aliens were beginning to understand that humans posed a unique threat to their empire. "They're scared," Green reported to the Joint Chiefs. "For the first time in their history, they're facing a species that they can't predict or control, and they don't know how to handle it." The breakthrough came when Engineer Clark's team completed their analysis of Zelfani control systems. The aliens used a centralized command structure that relied on instantaneous communication across their empire. If that system could be disrupted, their entire operation would collapse into chaos. But the most important discovery was psychological. The enslaved species throughout the galaxy were watching humanity's response with growing hope and excitement. For the first time in centuries, they were seeing proof that the Zelfani could be defied. Captain Morrison's final reconnaissance mission brought back intelligence that changed everything. The human prisoners had not just survived their captivity. They had turned it into an intelligence-gathering operation, building detailed maps of Zelfani weaknesses and establishing communication networks with other enslaved species. Danny Walsh had managed to send more coded messages, hidden in routine work reports. The messages revealed that the prisoners had identified the key vulnerability in Zelfani operations, their inability to function when their control systems were disrupted. Commander Rodriguez coordinated with resistance cells across 12-star systems, providing them with human-designed weapons and tactical plans. For the first time in centuries, slave uprisings began to succeed against Zelfani forces. The psychological impact was devastating to the Zelfani command structure. They had built their empire on the certainty that they were invincible, that no species could effectively resist their control. Humanity was proving that assumption wrong, and other species were taking notice. Dr. Thompson's final analysis revealed the critical insight that would determine the outcome of the war. The Zelfani Empire was not a military force in the traditional sense. It was a control system designed to manage compliant populations. When faced with truly hostile resistance, it had no effective response. General Stevens received authorization for Operation Broken Chain, a coordinated strike designed to shatter the Zelfani slave network permanently. The operation would require precise timing, advanced technology, and absolute commitment from every human involved. But the most important weapon in humanity's arsenal was not technological. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that freedom was worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. That idea, once planted in the minds of enslaved species across the galaxy, began to grow like wildfire. The Zelfani had ruled through fear for thousands of years. Now, for the first time, they were the ones who were afraid. And they were about to learn that frightened humans were the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Admiral Henry Carter stood in the command center on Earth, watching displays that showed human ships moving into position across 12-star systems. Operation Broken Chain was about to begin, and the fate of hundreds of enslaved worlds hung. In the balance, the plan was ambitious beyond anything humanity had ever attempted. Coordinated strikes on Zelfani control centers, simultaneous uprisings by enslaved populations, and the activation of a secret weapon that could disable alien command systems across the galaxy. Engineer Susan Clark made final adjustments to the Liberation Array, her masterpiece of reverse-engineered Zelfani technology. The device could broadcast a signal that would overload the control circuits used to monitor and suppress enslaved populations. The beauty of their system is also its weakness, Clark explained to the assembled strike team leaders. They control everything from central command nodes. Break those nodes and the whole system collapses. Captain Jake Morrison led battle. Group Alpha toward the processing station where the human volunteers were being held. His ship, the UES Defiance, had been modified with every piece of alien technology they could understand and improve upon. Commander Lisa Rodriguez coordinated communications with resistance cells throughout the target systems. The enslaved species had been preparing for this moment for months, building weapons and planning coordinated attacks on their captors. All units report ready, Rodriguez announced as the final pieces fell into place. Resistance groups in 11 systems confirm. They're standing by for the signal. Dr. Rachel White, the xenosociology specialist, monitored Zelfani communications from the intelligence center on Earth. The aliens were clearly worried about increased resistance activity, but they had no idea of the scope of what was coming. They're moving additional forces to their core systems, White reported. They think we're planning to attack their homeworlds. They don't realize we're targeting their control infrastructure. General Paul Stevens activated the operation from his command post aboard the flagship UES Vengeance. Across the galaxy, human ships began their approach to Zelfani facilities while resistance fighters prepared for the uprising that would change history. The first phase began when Lieutenant Colonel Tony Hughes led a strike team against the primary communication relay in the Vega system. The facility was lightly defended because the Zelfani had never faced a coordinated attack before. Hughes and his team moved through the alien structure with precision born of months of planning. They had studied every detail of Zelfani architecture, learned the location of every critical system, and practiced the assault countless times in simulators. Target secured, Hughes reported as his team planted charges on the communication array, moving to secondary objectives. Across the galaxy, similar teams struck at the nerve centers of the Zelfani Empire. Communication nodes, control centers, and command facilities were hit simultaneously, creating cascading failures in the alien control network. Captain Morrison's attack on the processing station was personal. Somewhere inside that facility were 12 humans who had volunteered to explore the stars and found themselves prisoners in an alien nightmare. The station's defenses were designed to prevent escape, not repel invasion. Morrison's modified weapons cut through Zelfani shields like paper, clearing the way for boarding parties to assault the facility. Commander Rodriguez led the first wave into the station, her team equipped with weapons designed specifically for fighting in the close quarters of alien architecture. They moved through corridors that had been mapped by human prisoners over months of careful observation. The first Zelfani they encountered seemed stunned by the ferocity of the human attack. These aliens had spent centuries managing compliant populations. They had never faced soldiers who considered death preferable to failure. Processing Section 7 secured, Rodriguez reported as her team reached the area where human prisoners were held. We found them. They're alive. Danny Walsh looked up from his workstation as armed humans in Earth military uniforms burst through the doors. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating from months of psychological conditioning. Then he recognized Rodriguez's voice. "Time to go home," Rodriguez said, helping Walsh to his feet. "All of you, Earth sent us to bring you back." The liberation of the human prisoners triggered uprisings throughout the facility. Species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly had hope and opportunity. The carefully maintained order of the processing station collapsed into revolution. Karen Bell and the other surviving volunteers had done more than just endure their captivity. They had built intelligence networks, mapped escape routes, and prepared detailed plans for facility-wide rebellion. When the moment came, they were ready. "The main control center is 3 levels up," Bell told Rodriguez as they fought their way through the station. If we can take it, we can free everyone in this facility. But the real battle was happening in space, where human ships engaged Zelthani vessels for the first time in galactic history. The aliens had superior technology, but they had no experience fighting enemies who refused to be intimidated. Captain Morrison's crew fought with a desperation and creativity that the Zelthani could not match. When their primary weapons failed, they used mining lasers. When their shields were damaged, they rammed enemy ships. When faced with overwhelming odds, they fought harder instead of surrendering. Engineer Clark's liberation array activated at the precise moment when Zelthani defenses were most disrupted. The signal propagated through their communication network, overloading control circuits on hundreds of worlds simultaneously on enslaved planets throughout the galaxy. The devices used to monitor and suppress populations suddenly went silent. For the first time in centuries, entire worlds were free from alien surveillance. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Species that had been slaves for generations suddenly found themselves able to communicate freely, move without monitoring, and act without permission. The revolution that followed was unstoppable. Elder Vrak led the Korathi uprising on their homeworld, using weapons and tactics provided by human advisors. The revolt succeeded because the Zelthani control systems were offline and their local forces were overwhelmed by the scale of the rebellion. The humans kept their promise, Vrak broadcast to resistance cells throughout the sector. The control grid is down. This is our moment. Strike now, strike hard, and strike together. Dr. Rachel White monitored the collapse of Zelthani communications from Earth. The aliens were trying to coordinate a response, but their entire command structure was built around centralized control. Without their communication networks, they couldn't function effectively. They're panicking, White reported to Admiral Carter. Intercepted transmissions show complete confusion in their command hierarchy. They've never dealt with system-wide failure before. The breakthrough came when Captain Morrison's team captured the main control center of the processing station. The facility's computer systems contained detailed records of the entire Zelthani slave operation, including the locations of command centers throughout their empire. Lieutenant Amy Foster worked frantically to download the alien databases before Zelthani reinforcements could arrive. The information she extracted would provide targets for follow-up operations and intelligence about enslaved populations throughout the galaxy. Got it, Foster announced as she completed the download. Every slave world, every control facility, every command center in their empire. We can hit them all. But the most important victory was psychological. For thousands of years, the Zelthani had ruled through the certainty that resistance was futile. Humanity had shattered that certainty, proving that the Empire could be defeated. News of the uprisings spread through underground networks faster than Zelthani forces could respond. On world after world, enslaved populations rose against their captors. Inspired by the example of human resistance and armed with human technology, General Stevens received reports from across the combat zone as the operation reached its climax. Human forces were outnumbered and outgunned, but they were winning because they understood something the Zelthani did not. Some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. Phase 1 complete, Stevens announced to the Joint Chiefs on Earth. Oh. Primary targets secured or destroyed. Liberation array functioning at full efficiency. Resistance uprisings confirmed in 27 systems. The Zelthani Empire was collapsing not from external invasion, but from internal revolution. The slaves they had controlled for centuries were turning against them, armed with human weapons and inspired by human determination. But the war was far from over. The Zelthani still had massive forces in their core systems, and they were beginning to understand the true scope of the threat they faced. For the first time in their history, they were preparing to fight a real war against an enemy that refused to surrender. Dr. Alex Thompson sat before the most powerful communication array in human history, preparing to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. The words he was about to speak would be heard by every Zelthani commander, every enslaved population, and every free species in known space. Zelthani Empire, Thompson began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of humanity's fury. Humanity knows what you are. We know what you have done, and we are coming for all of you. The message was broadcast simultaneously through captured Zelthani communication networks, human deep space transmitters, and resistance cells across 300 star systems. Within hours, it had reached every corner of the galaxy. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. On Zelthani command ships, officers who had never known fear suddenly understood what it meant to face an enemy that would not be reasoned with, bought off, or intimidated. High Trader Zenth, who had first contacted humanity with false promises of partnership, watched his empire collapse from his flagship in the core systems. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Slave worlds in rebellion, command centers destroyed, control systems offline. How is this possible? Zenth demanded of his subordinates. We have controlled the galaxy for thousands of years. No species has ever successfully resisted us. Trade Coordinator Velth studied the tactical displays with growing horror. The humans have done something we never anticipated. They have united our slaves against us. Every species we control is now fighting back. Captain Jake Morrison led the Liberation Fleet toward the Zelthani core systems, his ships accompanied by vessels from dozens of formerly enslaved species. The fleet grew larger as it traveled, with each liberated world contributing ships and crews to the final assault. Commander Lisa Rodriguez coordinated the diverse alliance of species that humanity had helped to free. Beings who had been enemies or strangers just months before now fought side by side against their common oppressor. The Karathi battle group is in position, Rodriguez reported. The Nexari squadrons are ready. The Velkans have confirmed their commitment to the assault. The United Fleet was not the largest force ever assembled in galactic history, but it was the most determined. Every ship carried crews who had suffered under Zelthani rule and were fighting for more than just military victory. They were fighting for justice. General Paul Stevens received his final orders from Admiral Carter as the fleet approached the Zelthani home systems. The mission was not just to defeat the alien empire, but to ensure it could never rise again. Complete destruction of their command infrastructure, Stevens read from his orders. Liberation of all remaining slave populations, and justice for every species they have oppressed. Engineer Susan Clark had spent the journey to the core systems developing one final weapon. The Liberation Array had been successful beyond all expectations, but she had improved the design. The new version could not just disable Zelthani control systems. It could rewrite them. We can turn their own technology against them, Clark explained to the assembled fleet commanders. Every control device they use to suppress slaves can be converted into a communication system for the resistance. The final battle began when Lieutenant Colonel Tony Hughes led the assault on the primary Zelthani command station. The facility was massive, protected by shields and weapons that represented thousands of years of technological advancement, but the defenders had one critical weakness. They had never fought an enemy that viewed death as preferable to defeat. When human and allied forces took casualties, they fought harder. When their weapons failed, they improvised. When faced with impossible odds, they found ways to make them possible. Hughes and his team fought through the command station with methodical precision. Every corridor was contested, every room had to be taken by force. But they advanced steadily toward the central command chamber where Zelthani leaders coordinated what remained of their empire. Danny Walsh, now recovered from his months of captivity, led a team of former prisoners in the assault. They knew the layout of Zelthani facilities better than anyone, and they had personal reasons for wanting to see the empire fall. Control Room 7 secured, Walsh reported as his team cleared another section of the station. Moving toward the main command center, no prisoners this time. Captain Morrison's ship, the UES Defiance, engaged the Zelthani flagship in direct combat. The alien vessel was larger and more heavily armed, but Morrison's crew fought with a desperation that their enemies could not match. When the Defiance's main weapons were destroyed, they used mining lasers When their shields failed, they closed to ramming distance. When the ship began to break apart, they boarded the enemy vessel and continued fighting hand to hand. The climactic moment came when Elder Vrak of the Korathi led a boarding party onto High Trader Zenth's flagship. The alien who had ruled over enslaved populations for centuries found himself face to face with beings who had suffered under his rule for their entire lives. "You told us resistance was futile," Vrak said as his warriors surrounded the Zelthani command crew. "You were wrong." But the real victory was not military. It was the moment when Engineer Clark activated the final version of the Liberation Array, broadcasting a signal that reached every enslaved population in the galaxy simultaneously. The message was simple but revolutionary. "You are free. The Zelthani Empire has fallen. Rise up and take back your worlds." On 300 planets, in countless space stations and mining facilities, enslaved beings heard those words and understood that their long nightmare was finally over. The uprisings that followed completed the work that human resistance had begun. Dr. Rachel White monitored the collapse of Zelthani civilization from the command ship. Their communication networks were destroyed, their control systems had been turned against them, and their slaves had become their enemies. "Total collapse confirmed across all sectors," White reported. "No organized Zelthani resistance remaining. All slave worlds report successful liberation." The war ended not with a dramatic final battle, but with a simple surrender. High Trader Zenth, trapped in his damaged flagship with his empire in ruins around him, made one last attempt at negotiation. "We offer to withdraw to our original systems," Zenth transmitted to the Allied fleet. "We will abandon our territories and cease all slave operations." Surely this is acceptable to reasonable beings. Admiral Carter's response was broadcast across the galaxy for all to hear. "You had your chance to be merchants and partners. You chose to be slavers and predators. Now you face the consequences." The Zelthani leadership was brought before tribunals, representing every species they had enslaved. The trials were not about revenge, but about justice and ensuring that such atrocities could never happen again. Danny Walsh testified about the deception that had brought him and his fellow volunteers into captivity. Karen Bell described the systematic psychological torture used to break the will of enslaved populations. Engineer Clark explained how Zelthani technology had been designed specifically to make resistance seem impossible, but the most powerful. Testimony came from beings who had spent their entire lives in slavery, who had watched their children born into captivity, who had been told for generations that freedom was an impossible dream. Dr. Thompson's final report to the United Nations captured the true significance of what humanity had accomplished. They had not just won a war or liberated enslaved populations. They had proven that oppression was not inevitable, that tyrants could be defeated, and that freedom was worth any sacrifice to defend. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Zelthani Empire was fundamentally different from what had come before. Species that had been enemies or strangers became allies and friends. Technology was shared freely instead of being hoarded by rulers. Trade was conducted between equals instead of masters and slaves. Humanity found itself in an unexpected position of leadership, not because they were the strongest or most advanced species, but because they had been willing to fight for principles that others had thought were lost forever. Commander Rodriguez established the Galactic Liberation Council, an organization dedicated to preventing the rise of another empire like the Zelthani. The Council's charter was simple: freedom was not negotiable, oppression would not be tolerated, and any species that chose slavery over liberty would face the united opposition of all free peoples. Captain Morrison returned to exploring the galaxy. But now he traveled not as a lone human seeking contact with aliens, but as an ambassador of the free worlds, carrying a message of hope to any species still suffering under tyranny. The Zelthani had ruled through fear for thousands of years, convinced that their power was absolute and their victims were helpless. They had made one critical error in that calculation. They had never encountered humans, and once humans knew the truth about what the Zelthani really were, the slavers, doom had indeed been sealed.